Hello, and welcome to our webinar, How Big Data and AI Are Driving Business Innovation in 2018. I'm David Curon, Executive Editor at MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be your moderator today. This event is going to be recorded and will be available to all attendees approximately 3 to 4 business days after the end of the live event. In addition, today's slides will be made available to all attendees. We welcome your questions for our speaker today. To submit questions, please enter them anytime in Questions module on the GoToWebinar control panel. Or you can submit questions on Twitter using the hashtag #MITSMR event. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. If you're having audio difficulties while listening via computer, please call in via telephone instead, or check the help link in the upper part of your console. Our speaker today is Randy Bean, CEO of NewVantage Partners and a contributing author for MIT Sloan Management Review. Our thanks go out to Bold360 by LogMeIn for their sponsorship of this webinar. So how big data and AI are driving business innovation? With all the excitement about AI, it's crucial for corporate leaders to know whether the excitement is justified. Is this much ado about nothing? Just how significant are the innovations taking place in a given organization? Are the shiny examples of fraud detection, self-driving cars, X-ray interpretation, automated, customized, personalized shopping experiences indicative of what's happening throughout the corporate landscape, or not? What exactly is the scale of AI innovation in today's enterprise? Are we merely talking about cost reductions and process improvement, new products, or are we talking about new business models? Randy has the answers. Randy has a deep background in IT. He started NewVantage Partners in 2001. He's currently a monthly big data columnist for the he was a monthly big data columnist for the Wall Street Journal. He is a monthly columnist for Forbes. He's contributed a number of articles and also graciously accepted being interviewed by us at MIT Sloan Management Review. He's also contributed to Harvard Business Review. He's been conducting executive thought leadership roundtables for years, and his organization has offices around the country. His current focus is on big data and AI innovation, and has recently conducted actually has a annual series of surveys of executives looking at how big data is influencing the practice of management.
David, thank you.
I'm going to hand it over to Randy. Thanks very much. We're all very excited to learn more about what you're finding in the field.
Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here with MIT Sloan Management Review. What I'm going to speak about over the course of the next hour are results from an annual survey that we conduct of C-level executives. It's focused on how they're leveraging data, and that leads into areas such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, and blockchain. The theme of the 2018 survey was how big data and AI are driving business innovation. Nearly 60 Fortune 1000 firms participated in the survey, and these represented a bellwether of blue-chip firms, including firms such as American Express, Capital One, Ford Motors, Goldman Sachs, MetLife, Morgan Stanley, and Verizon, among others. And as you'll see shortly, the participants in the survey were the executives that had primary responsibility for data initiatives within their organization. An overwhelming majority of the executives identified themselves as the C-level executive decision makers regarding AI and big data initiatives. As you can see in the charts here, in terms of respondents, 55.6% of the respondents were chief data officers, and then other respondents included chief analytics officers, chief data scientists, chief information officers, chief marketing officers, among other roles. You can also see heavy participation from financial services firms, as financial services firms have been among the leading firms in terms of adoption of data capabilities and also investments in data capabilities, and we can talk a little bit about that as we go forward. The next slide on page 8 will show a full set of the firms that participated. So as mentioned, you can see there's a very representative set of household names in the financial services industry, as well as in other industries, including pharma and medical, which have been more recent in terms of their use of data to drive their initiatives. These industries have typically had large volumes of data, but have not formally organized it and had the data capabilities that financial services firms. So this slide shows how big data and AI are closely linked. Approximately 20 odd years ago, I actually worked in this building where this webinar is being broadcast from. I worked on natural language programs. And what was interesting, what's been interesting to me, is how in recent years technologies such as Siri and Alexa have now become very common. And these were the types of capabilities that we're working with 20, 25 years ago in this very building. But one of the issues at that time was that the data sets that were available were very small, and as a result, the capabilities of natural language and other artificial intelligence applications were very limited. In a recent article just from this past month in Datamation magazine, speaking about big data versus artificial intelligence, it highlighted some of the reasons why big data and AI are closely linked. Specifically, AI requires big data to build its intelligence, particularly through machine learning processes. Also, big data provides data needed to train AI learning algorithms. And AI doesn't deduce conclusion, it learns through trial and error, which requires massive amounts of data to teach the artificial intelligence applications. So it's safe to say that without big data, there really is no artificial intelligence. And one of the biggest things that I've seen in industry over the past few years is the way that big data is really empowering artificial intelligence capabilities. So with regards to the survey, there are 5 key findings that emerged, which we'll be discussing and presenting the data that supports these findings. The first one is the fear of disruption that large organizations are facing, and how this is fueling investment in big data and AI initiatives as these firms fight to stay relevant and competitive in their particular marketplace. Second major theme and finding is how big data, as mentioned, is directly empowering AI investment and initiatives. Third, firms are reporting measurable results from big data and AI investments, and we'll talk a little bit about this relative to what firms are saying and what firms are actually demonstrating from their big data and AI initiatives and investments. Fourth, there's been the emergence of a new role in recent years, and we'll look at some of the data around this, but a number of firms have now appointed chief data officers, and they are serving as emerging champions for big data and artificial intelligence initiatives. And finally, business adoption of big data and AI initiatives remains a challenge for organizations. So let's dig into the data. Looking at slide 11, this focuses on the question of the fear of disruption. And as shown in this slide, you can see that a majority of executives, 79.4%, now say that they fear disruption and potential displacement from data-driven competitors with highly agile data cultures. This is up sharply from 2017. It's been interesting to me personally that in 2017, for example, I was surprised to see that nearly half of executives admitting this fear of disruption and displacement, because many of these companies have existed for not only decades, but in some instances over 100 years, companies like American Express, Charles Schwab, organizations of that kind. And so for top leadership to admit very frankly that they're concerned about some of the new and emerging technologies and trends and the impact that data is having on organizations is quite an admission. And by 2018, in this year's survey, that number had risen even more significantly, where now nearly 4/5 of executives say that they're very concerned in terms of managing their organizations, the threats from external competitors that are data-driven and agile. In terms of where these companies are investing, slide 12 shows that companies are increasing their investments in big data and AI, machine learning initiatives. Also, firms are investing in cloud computing and blockchain. Slide shows that nearly 3/4 of executives believe that investments in AI and machine learning will have a transformational and disruptive impact on their business, and this is up sharply from less than 50% in 2017. So these are real issues driving AI and big data investments. Some additional data here showing 93% of firms have significantly increased their investments in AI and machine learning initiatives. They've also increased their investments in other areas. As mentioned, executives see the biggest threats from data-driven competitors who have now developed highly agile data cultures. Most of the companies that participated in this firm are what would be considered legacy firms. What that means is they've existed for many years. They also have large infrastructure and large organizations, many employees, and they have to invest massive amounts of money into their data initiatives and maintaining their data environments and knowledge of their customers. And these companies now feel major threats from the Amazons, Googles, Apples, and Facebook, and even within specific industries like financial services, data-driven companies like Capital One have posed a threat to traditional incumbents. Majority of executives, 54.4%, report an inability to be nimble and compete on the inability to be nimble and compete on data is the biggest competitive threat that they face today. Second key theme which came out of this survey is how big data is directly empowering AI investment and initiatives. We talked a little bit about this at the outset. It doesn't take great insight to understand that the more data you have and the more data that you have in a granular fashion at your fingertips, the greater impact this is going to have on machine learning and AI initiatives. The big breakthrough of big data has been to take massive amounts of data, make it easily accessible in greater varieties, sources, greater levels of granularity, so that firms are no longer in a position where they're reliant on small sample data sets. As an example, historically have done a lot of work with American Express and have written some case studies about the work that American Express has done in terms of credit approvals. It used to be that Amex took a subset of information and based credit approvals on that, and that was standard for most major firms. American Express now makes credit decisions in less than a minute, looking at the complete history of financial history of a customer's purchases, and they're able to do that because of the power of Hadoop capabilities, massively parallel computing powers, and the ability to bring all of the relevant data to bear. So that's an example of how firms are leveraging the power of big data to make decisions faster and to support machine learning and AI initiatives. One thing that the survey indicated was that an overwhelming percentage of executives, 97%, reported that their companies are now actively investing in building or launching big data and AI initiatives. For purposes of this survey, we lumped big data and artificial intelligence together because, back to that original point about how they're becoming inextricably intertwined. So even though 97% of executives indicated they're investing in big data and AI initiatives, the investments are further ahead in big data and at an earlier stage in terms of more active artificial intelligence initiatives. On slide 15, again, this reinforces the notion that artificial intelligence and big data initiatives go hand in hand. 76.5% of the executives acknowledge that the proliferation and greater availability of data is directly empowering AI and cognitive initiatives. Actually, in short order, I would think that close to 100% of executives over the coming years would acknowledge the link between availability of data and the ability to initiate and execute on AI initiatives. And as noted, AI initiatives directly benefit from access to richer, more granular, more complete, more extensive data in vastly greater volumes, varieties, and data sources that have previously been available to these organizations. This has been the major breakthrough. On slide 16, investment in data and AI initiatives continues to grow, but most big data and AI investments remain small and experimental, focusing on innovation around the edge. What does that mean? Organizations are setting up big data and AI labs, centers of excellence, analytical sandboxes. These are some of the approaches that organizations are taking so that they can identify initial applications where they can achieve breakthroughs with big data and artificial intelligence. And as they gain a foothold, as they establish credibility, and as they build momentum, they can move these applications into production and begin to look at the next set of initiatives, the next set of business questions that they can potentially answer using big data and artificial intelligence. So relative to traditional mainframe environments, that is still where the lion's share of investment is going in terms of computing power within large organizations. But the amount of dollars being invested in big data and AI initiatives continues to grow with each year. The data here shows that it's still a relatively small number that are investing over $500 million in big data and AI initiatives, but some of the largest names in the country are at that level of investment now. For most firms, even the largest firms, their total investment in big data and AI remains relatively small as a part of their total information technologies investments. Moving to slide 17 and theme 3. Firms are reporting measurable results from big data and AI investments, and is shown here in the graphics and chart. 73% of firms, of executives, report that their organizations are achieving measurable results from the big data and AI investments. And this is a sharp uptick from the 48.4% that reported measurable results from big data and AI in 2017. So we're reaching a stage where organizations are now able to report specific benefits from their investments over the past several years in big data and AI initiatives. Moving to slide 18, this shows the areas where executives reported that they're investing in terms of big data and AI capabilities within their organizations. All of these in some form to enable better insight and better decisions. Specifically, 84.1% of executives identified enabling better decisions using advanced analytics as the primary area where they're investing. Other areas are decreasing expenses, specific activities around innovation, disruption, more accelerated speed to market, and monetization. I think a more helpful view of this slide is shown on slide number 19, where it breaks this information out more specifically. And what this slide illustrates is the organizations that identified each of these areas as their number one goal. So as you can see, advanced analytics and better decisions was the number one priority of the largest number of respondents, where at the other end, monetization was a smaller number one priority. And then it shows the number of organizations that have launched initiatives in these areas. So as you can see, nearly 85% have launched initiatives to support advanced analytics and better decisions, whereas on the lower end of the scale, monetization at 31.9% still remains more of an aspiration than where organizations have initiated activities at this time. And then, to me, one of the things that's most interesting is where organizations have achieved success and the calculation that determines what the rate of success is. So, for example, achieving advanced analytics and better decisions through big data and AI, there's been a high success rate. Basically, you have more information about your customers, about your markets, about your capabilities. You can gain greater insight, and also through decreasing expenses. That's been the area of low-hanging fruit for many organizations, meaning that initial investments in big data and AI were often targeted at expense reduction because it was areas where improvements could be recognized very rapidly. But again, you see areas such as monetization, which many organizations would say is the holy grail in terms of why they're investing in big data and AI. It still remains largely aspirational, and the rate of success remains proportionately low. So significant that 31.9% of firms are attempting to monetize their big data and AI investments and develop, for example, new products and services that are directly focused on monetization, but that remains more at the leading edge for these organizations.
Thanks, Randy. Let's take a pause at this point and do some poll questions and see how your results compare to what the participants are seeing, the webinar participants are seeing. So if we could get the first poll question up. Randy, you're not allowed to vote.
Okay, thank you.
But the first question is, does your organization fear disruption from AI and data-driven competitors? It's clearly one of the motivators for AI investment and adoption, and the survey respondents that you've been surveying, Randy. Let's see what the participants believe. So it's so nice to get instantaneous feedback. So yeah, it looks like close to 3/5 of the webinar participants are concerned about disruption to their organization from AI and other competitors. What's your reaction,
and if I could comment here, that's interesting, and it's directionally consistent with the survey. If you noted previously, in 2017, 46.6% of these C-level senior executives said they feared disruption. In 2018, it went up to 79.4%. So these numbers are in that range, and I'm not fully sure of the participants here in terms of where they sit in the organizations, in terms of their roles, whether they sit on the business or technology side, and what type of firms they're in. So there, may be a number of factors that account for, the variation. But directionally, this is very consistent. There's a clear view that there's a 2-to-1, over 2-to-1 in favor of the view that they fear disruption.
Okay, let's move to the next poll question. So is your firm investing in AI and machine learning initiatives? There was almost a unanimous investment in the survey respondents that you were looking at, Randy, let's see what webinar participants are, what's going on in the companies that are represented by the webinar participants. So yeah, almost 2/3 of firms seem to be investing in AI. Randy, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I would say again that this is directionally consistent. One of the things that I'll talk about a little bit here, I can talk about it now, is the gap between what organizations say and what organizations do. And one of the things that we found interesting is, for example, we have that number of 93% investing in AI and machine learning initiatives. But I've been working with author Tom Davenport, who's an MIT fellow and also a fellow with our firm, and we've collaborated on a series of case studies relative to what firms are doing relative to AI and machine learning initiatives. And what we found is that for whatever reason, the number of firms that are able or willing to talk about what they're tangibly doing in AI and machine learning is much smaller than the total subset of folks that said they were doing things. So we've published about a dozen case studies now, and I'll refer to those a bit at the end. But there sometimes seems to be a gap between what people say they're doing and what people are actually doing. So I guess some takeaways from that. Clearly, firms are investing in AI and machine learning, whether it's 63% or 70% or 93%, remains to be seen. Relative to firms that are able to specifically talk and present a case study today about what they're doing with AI and machine learning, it's a little bit harder to pin those folks down.
Okay, interesting. So let's one more poll question here. Is big data empowering AI at your firm? So again, as you were pointing out, having big data capabilities is an important prerequisite for being able to do artificial intelligence. It'd be interesting to see if there's a correspondingly high level of big data use in firms. So it looks like there's a gap.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say this. To me, it's no mystery why AI has gained such a foothold in the past 2 or 3 years. And if you look at a continuum, it's a direct result of more information, more data, more granular data, the ability to feed AI and machine learning algorithms. So these results are a little surprising to me, to the degree that I had indicated previously that I believe that the true answer was actually 100%. But that's my personal bias.
Is it possible you think that big data, like what people mean by big data, is changing, and that could partly explain this difference?
Yeah, because with a lot of these terms, big data or artificial intelligence, the terms mean different things to different people. And when we conduct the survey, we very specifically state what we mean by big data in the context of the survey. And we use the definition of big data means any data, large or small, structured or unstructured. When we use the term big data, we're really referring to a new set of approaches and capabilities, not to get too deep in the weeds or too technical, but moving to Hadoop-like capabilities as opposed to traditional data warehouses, with the idea being, there's terminology such as load and go, but the whole idea is not to have to wait for significant periods of time to have access to data, and also to be able to have access to much more richer and granular data. and also to be able to have data analysts and business analysts and even business executives that can look at data, say this data is indicative or this data is relevant to me. Let's get more of this data and let's get it rapidly, and this other data is less useful. So it creates a much more interactive, dynamic, agile type of environment. So I think that this agility and this ability to access data rapidly has, had a direct impact on what organizations can be able to do and now think about in terms of making AI a reality as opposed to theoretical. It's interesting to me because we have a partner within our firm who 30 plus years ago graduated from Yale University with a PhD in artificial intelligence. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I said, your moment has come. AI is finally happening now. And his response was, oh no, AI will never happen. So he had lived through so many decades of talk about AI without successful AI initiatives that could be pointed to that he had just passed the point. So he doesn't fully grasp that now this ready access to data and this proliferation of data was actually making AI initiatives real for many organizations. So that's a fundamental change.
Interesting. Yeah, Yale grads in artificial intelligence are probably a hot commodity right now. All right, let's continue with with your presentation, please. And we do have a few more poll questions after the next set of slides. But Randy, please go forward.
Thank you, David. And so the fourth key theme here was that a new role was emerging within organizations to champion big data and AI initiatives, and that role is the Chief Data Officer. And I think one of the most astounding things is if you look 5 or 6 years ago at 2012, only 12% of organizations acknowledged having appointed somebody in the role of Chief Data Officer. And by 2017, this had crept up to over 50%. And now in 2018, we're at a point where it's nearly 2/3 of organizations. It varies a little bit among industries. For example, in financial services and specifically banking, as an outgrowth of 2008-2009 financial crisis, there was an imperative for banks and many financial services organizations from a regulatory perspective to name somebody within their organization who was responsible for data and had ultimate authority. And so as a result of that, within financial services in particular, this role of the Chief Data Officer was established, but we see it expanding across many industries. It went just from banking to insurance, asset management, and now it's moving into areas such as pharmaceutical and healthcare. So there's been a significant adoption of this role. But one of the challenges in being a new role is that organizations are really struggling to define what the responsibilities are and what the ultimate role is of the Chief Data Officer. And in this survey, the finding that I found most interesting of anything else is when organizations and executives were asked to identify the criteria that made for a successful Chief Data Officer, it was contradictory. So just over 1/3 of organizations said it should be an external change agent, somebody who comes from outside the company, somebody who needs to shake things up, bring fresh perspectives, an outsider. Nearly 1/3 said it needs to be somebody who's a company veteran, an insider who knows the organization, who knows how to get things done. They don't even necessarily have to have any background in data and technology, but they need to know the organization, know how to get things done. And then you take the remnants, again, sharply divergent viewpoints. 15%, a significant number, said that the Chief Data Officer needed to be a data scientist or somebody who came from a deep analytics background, really understood applying data and manipulating data. And another significant percent, just over 10%, said that the Chief Data Officer should be a line executive who's been responsible for results, somebody who'd run a P&L. And then there was a percentage that said it should be a technology executive. One of the things that we're seeing as a result of this range of opinions on what constitutes a successful chief data officer is that there's been very high turnover in this position, and in some, the chief data officer may be the toughest position in industry today. I can tell you with top 5 banks that some of them are into their second, third, or fourth chief data officer within the past 6 years. So it's a role where there's potential and opportunity, but no consensus on what the responsibilities are and what the background and skills are. Slide 22 relates exactly to that question of, what should be the primary responsibilities of a chief data officer. On the left-hand side on the graphic, you see that very chief data officers are being assigned revenue responsibility, so that also puts them in a challenging position more as influencers as opposed to somebody that is being judged based upon bottom-line results. And a surprising number of organizations indicated that there's actually no single point of accountability for data and AI initiatives within their organization. So being data-driven is something, and developing data cultures is something that's new for many organizations. It's a long-term process, it's a path, it's a journey, and as these data and statistics bear out, organizations are still in the early stages of that journey for the most part. And just lastly on this point about the chief data officer, there's a lack of consensus on what the future role of the chief data officer is. Nearly half of executives do not see the chief data officer as a top role within their firm, and a minority but significant percent of executives don't even believe that the chief data officer role is necessary. And one of the things that are seeing in firsthand experience is that a number of organizations are moving to combine the chief data and chief analytics officer roles into this newer title called the chief data and analytics officer, and we'll see if that's a path that leads to a little bit more consistency in how organizations think about the chief data officer role. Moving to the final theme here, relative to business adoption of big data and AI initiatives. Most firms report that in spite of all of the capabilities that exist now, in spite of the proliferation of data, in spite of new technologies, that business adoption of data initiatives remains a challenge. Roughly 2/3 of organizations indicate that. And as you can see at the bottom of this page, technology does not seem to be the issue. Only 5% of organizations cite technology leadership or solutions being the problem. The barrier to successful business adoption, as most organizations reported, are cultural issues, understanding of data as an asset, organizational alignment, business agility, lack of communication in terms of business direction, executive leadership. So it's ironic that technology has made breakthroughs in big data and artificial intelligence possible, but the technology in itself doesn't ensure adoption within an organization. So much of the issues relate to cultural challenges, and on a day-to-day basis, those are where I'm typically engaged by organizations. They come with questions. We have the capabilities, we have the data, but we have end business executives that are not seeing the ability to move the dial in terms of their business initiatives. They don't have the right data at their fingertips when they need it. And so many of these issues boil down to all of the business process and people issues to truly make organizations data-driven and a data culture. And that's highlighted a little bit by the statistics on slide 25, where almost the universal acclamation of organizations say we want to be data-driven and we have initiatives in place to develop a data-driven culture. but only a third of those organizations report success, and the numbers really haven't changed significantly from the previous year, 2017. In fact, the success rate has gone down. And on the bottom part of this page, again, technology is not the big issue for most organizations. It's people issues, and that really highlights the reality for many organizations that this is a multi-year process, in some cases 3, 5, possibly 10 years. Being in an environment now where organizations such as the tech giants and other startups are agile and data-driven, the large incumbents, the legacy firms, will have to learn how to be nimble as well and to move faster if they're going to stay competitive in their marketplace and in the economy.
Thanks, Randy. And let's do a couple more poll questions and then wrap up the presentation and then move to a Q&A. So if we could get the next poll question, thank you. So this question is, are you seeing measurable results from your big data and AI investments? So 39% said they did not know the answer to this question. So this answer enables us to make some inferences potentially about sort of whether or not they're on the business side or the tech side. But Randy, what's your take on this answer?
Well, it's at variance with the executives who reported. 73% said they had measurable results from big data and AI investments. And it's interesting because, again, that gets back to the point about what people say versus what they do or what the realities are on the ground. Again, these are self-reported information. These are what executives are presenting in terms of their position relative to whether their organization is realizing measurable results. So it's very interesting to see the participants have a much lower number. I can't say who's being more honest and forthcoming. The data speaks for itself.
And it's also the case that you're surveying extremely large organizations,
yes,
right? In some of the industries that are leading the way on AI. And we typically have a more diverse set of webinar participants. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say large organizations and top-of-the-house executives that are also responsible for these initiatives. So it could be said that if, again, I don't want to theorize or overinterpret or speculate, but if, for example, you're responsible for success from big data and AI initiatives and you're reporting, no, you don't have measurable results, that could raise the question of, well, why aren't you more successful in what you're chartered to do? So I can't speak to the motives, but it's very interesting. I think this is one of the real questions in terms of understanding the state of big data and AI is, what are organizations really achieving?
Okay, let's move to the next poll question, please. So is business adoption of big data and AI initiatives a challenge for your firm? So we have basically 4 out of 5 participants are saying that it is a challenge. Randy, how does this compare to your results?
Yeah,
or what you're seeing in the field?
Yeah, I'd say it pretty much mirrors the results. We had 64% of the executives who participated said it remains a challenge. Here it says 79%. The fact is that it's a big number. Most organizations are facing a challenge in terms of adoption of big data and AI, and whether it's with different constituencies, 64 or 79. Yes, the message is clear. These technology capabilities exist, but just because they exist, it doesn't mean that organizations are in a position today to derive business value.
Okay. Let's wrap up the presentation, and let's move to the next slide. There you go.
Yeah. So there's just 2 remaining slides here. One is some takeaways, and I'll just go through those very rapidly so there's the opportunity to ask questions. Be patient, as I spoke about. Big data and AI adoption is a journey. It's not a sprint. Develop a long-term plan. It's hard to get to a destination without a roadmap. Organizations also need to establish progress along the way. So look at opportunities to focus on quick wins, and these quick wins can help organizations establish credibility, build momentum. I often encourage organizations to focus on one business question, and that once they can answer that one business question and build confidence within the organization, then move to a second and a third and a fourth. So that quick wins is very important in terms of developing short-term steps that lead to a long-term outcome. Also mentioned about the importance around innovation around the edges. I encourage organizations to establish analytic sandboxes, big data and artificial intelligence labs, centers of excellence, so they can identify specific activities, business questions, applications that make sense in terms of where you want to begin to push the envelope and see where you can innovate in your business. And as you achieve momentum, then you can move that into other areas of the business. And I'll give an example. Worked many years with Wells Fargo Bank, and they established something in the early 2000s called the Internet Services Group, ISG. And this was where basically they were going to use the internet and online as the primary channel for interacting with their customers. And so that started out with, it was a very small percentage of customers, but within 7 or 8 years, over 50-60% of customers were coming in through that group, the Internet Services Group. So ultimately, it went from being the avant-garde, dealing with a minority of customers, to becoming the mainstream. And at that point, then you just blend it into the organization. But that's often how these things start. And again, along these same lines, migrating initiatives from test environments to production and having a systematic process to do that. It's very important for organizations to celebrate their successes and communicate and get the message out. That's why, we do a lot of these case studies so organizations can talk about their successes and build momentum and understanding within their own organizations. And then lastly, to this final point, don't underestimate the cultural obstacles. Focus on people and process. And some of these things may be generational issues as well, that it takes a new generation to fully embrace and adopt some of these capabilities. Closing thought, those companies that prove themselves to be adept at developing and executing initiatives using big data and AI will likely be the companies that are best positioned to deflect threats of agile, data-driven competitors in the decade ahead. And lastly, I mentioned case studies and articles on this topic. In MIT Sloan Review, a number of these articles, and then I write a regular column for Forbes and contribute to some other publications as well on this topic. So I very much welcome your questions.
Thank you, Randy. That concludes the presentation portion of our program today, and we'll now move on to our Q&A. And we've gotten lots of great questions, and we'll continue to take your questions for the remainder of the hour. A reminder that you can submit your questions by entering them into the questions module or on Twitter using the hashtag MITSMR event. So the first question that's we'll take on is Randy, comes from an audience member who asks, you mentioned agility a few times. How does artificial intelligence help us work in more agile ways?
That's a good question. It's also a difficult question. I think that what artificial intelligence does is it augments human capacity and human bandwidth. It doesn't mean that you need people and large organizations to complete each task. And so as a result of that, it ultimately leads to organizations being more flexible and more agile. Another way of looking at it is you can do a lot more work with a lot fewer people. That raises all kinds of issues in and of itself, but it's a reality.
Great. And another question relates to the chief data officer role. One question is, why is the CDO position so difficult to fill or perform in? Do CEOs know how to task this people in this role with the right kinds of responsibilities?
Yeah, organizations aren't used to thinking about data as an asset. They're not used to thinking about how data is produced, the touch points on data, where data is, new data is created, how data is consumed within an organization. Most corporations, particularly large corporations, they came out of product histories. They were organized by product lines. Their financial measures and systems were organized by product. And then in the 1990s, 2000s, organizations moved to have more of a customer focus, and hence the investment in CRM type of applications, database marketing. And so really looking at organizations looking at their business from a data perspective is new for most organizations. It requires an orthogonal type of thinking. Data cuts across all lines of businesses, all products, and so typically there's not one single person that's responsible for data within an organization. There hasn't been historically, because data has been owned by many different people within an organization. It's been fragmented and decentralized, and so it requires a different perspective, and those are the reasons why getting a handle on data and becoming data-driven is difficult for most organizations. If you start as a greenfield business, if you start as Google and Facebook, and you know all these things from day one, or Capital One as a bank, who have been in existence, I believe now 30 or 40 years, they're still relatively new to the legacy type of environment. So there's a lot more flexibility when you don't have to work with, most major financial services firms still have a significant portion of their applications on COBOL applications that were written in the 1970s.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to hear your perspective on this proliferation of data-related roles. The chief data officer, the chief analytics officer, the chief information officer, even the chief digital officer has a connection with data. And I was wondering, sort of, if you look at that collection of titles and roles, how should leaders or companies, think about how those roles should relate to one another?
Well, I think it's another step in technology innovation and how companies are becoming more technology-driven and now more data-driven. It's, being with MIT Sloan Review and being with MIT, you can probably speak to this more intelligently than I can, but the massive computing power and the ability to capture massive amounts of information on computers, and particularly now to capture information in online environments and to capture sensor type of information, the explosive exponential, geometric, whatever the right terminology is, computing power and the amounts of new types of data that never existed that are being captured has created an environment where those organizations that can take advantage of that are exponentially ahead of those organizations that are doing business as usual and following business processes that were developed 20 and 30 years ago and haven't migrated and recognized the transformational impact that computing power and prevalence of data are having.
Okay, thanks. So here's another question. I think this one is directly speaks to probably a number of many people in our audience today, and that is it concerns small businesses and AI. Is AI strictly the province of large companies with access to their own large data sets, or how should small businesses be thinking about opportunities with respect to AI, small and medium-sized enterprises?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how qualified I am to answer that, except for to speculate. We typically work with and see large organizations that invest billions of dollars in technology initiatives on an annual basis. I mean, that's the size of the budgets of these organizations, and a significant portion of that is focused on data. And, I would just add why financial services institutions are so prevalent in this is because they have very rich information on their customers. In terms of small businesses, I operate a small business. We try to be data-driven, but I haven't figured out an artificial intelligence application for us yet. If the volumes are so small that you can manage the information using basic tools, or you have the information at your fingertips, you don't get the scale benefit that you do when you're managing, tens of millions of customers.
Okay. So we are just about ready to wrap up here. If you could one last quick question, and that has to do with do big companies find success in AI machine learning through mergers and acquisition, or are they finding success building in-house capabilities?
I'll give you one specific example. In financial services, there's been this massive disruptive capability over the past few years called fintech, which is short for financial technology. And that is where large financial services firms have created these fintech centers, which is another form of the data labs or centers for excellence, where they can focus on new technologies, new payment methods, other capabilities where they can find ways to compete with the Googles and Amazons that are trying to rapidly enter and disrupt traditional industries, including financial services like they have in retail.
Okay. Thanks so much, Randy. So
My
that's
pleasure.
All the time we have for today's Q&A session. Over the next few days, please look out for a feedback survey we'll send via email. We greatly appreciate your thoughts and opinions. A reminder that a recording of this program, along with the slides, will be available within 3 to 4 business days. That concludes our program. Thank you for attending. Thank you to our presenter, Randy Bean, and our thanks to our sponsor, Bold360 by LogMeIn.
Thank you very much.